What happens when two seasoned business leaders get together? They talk shop, of course. Sit back and listen in as Scott DeLong and Vince Moiso share from their experience around current issues facing executives, entrepreneurs, and their leadership teams. The CEO Podcast starts now.
Hey everybody, it's Scott DeLong here with Vince Moiso. We are entering into season 3 of the CEO Podcast. Really appreciate the following that we've gotten and the feedback that we've gotten from people. Yeah. It's been great. So I've been very happy about that. Yeah. So we just got through sitting around talking about subjects that we're going to talk about for this upcoming season, and we got a great list going and a good list of people that we think we're going to use for our guests. Obviously, we've got to extend those invitations, but it looks good. So one of the things that we want to talk about this week, though, is a subject that I love. In fact, I studied it a lot when I was working through my doctorate, and it's on vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So I'd say the leading expert in this right now is Brene Brown when she talks about the power of vulnerability. Yeah. It's probably, 10 years old now when she did that TED Talk, but it's been viewed more than 5 million times.
Yeah, I mean, I shared with you earlier, like I'm about halfway through Daring Greatly right now. Yeah, and it's it's awesome, and I mean, she just gets right out of the gate. She's getting vulnerable in her book. And you say, well, what good does that do in the business world? Well, for me, it does a lot of good. Mm-hmm. And there were in my life, you talked a little bit about my story, but. I was always successful in everything that I did. Things worked, seemed to work for me, but I wasn't getting where I wanted to be on the personal side. And through a combination of 3 things, and the EO being one of them, it was one of the 3 things: the educational process, the other, and then the third one was our involvement in Al-Anon and Nar-Anon. Three themes came to me. Yeah. 3 things that I didn't grow up with, that I didn't know anything about, and vulnerability was the first. Humility was the second, and empathy was the third. And so for me, what I found is that these were the 3 principles in my life that I needed to learn, because I certainly didn't grow up with them. And we're going to talk about vulnerability today a little bit, and I could tell story after story after. I was 7 years old. My grandfather died, and I didn't cry. We just weren't allowed to. Yeah. I was too vulnerable. In my family of origin, if you were vulnerable, somebody would step on your neck so they could be 6 inches taller, right? It's just the way it worked. So we hid that from each other. But what I found was that even in the business world, and I know you guys practice this at your company with, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but in the business world or in a personal life, it doesn't matter which one, what I found is that vulnerability is the most attractive quality I can have. And I really believe that. It attracts people to you when you're vulnerable. Well, when you open up to somebody, then they're more likely to open up to you. We've talked about that. I mean, we had an amazing guest, early on, Scott Empringham, and we talked about the subject of vulnerability, and I mean, it's a crazy good episode. I highly recommend that you go back and listen to it because all 3 of us got incredibly vulnerable in there, especially Scott. And so he was a great guest to set that tone.
And actually Warren Taylor as well, talking about his struggle with cancer.
No question.
There's a lot of vulnerability in there. Big, strong football player that got there. But what I want to talk today, though, is about vulnerability in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And where does that matter, and when does that matter? There's something that, and if you don't, tell me cut if you don't want to talk about this, but there's something that I heard within your organization that you recently started. I think you started in the sales side of it, right? You brought people together, and it was called Ask Me Anything. Whew, that's scary.
Well, so here's what's funny, and you may not remember this.
First, how does that work?
Well, listen though. So we had a guest from Garachi Law Firm. Right, and she talked about that. They have what they call a town hall, right? Yep. And I think they do it monthly. I can't remember if it's weekly, monthly, something like that. And then they do have, with all the partners of the law firm, they do this thing, Ask Me Anything, and then off
off the podcast, I asked her a little bit more about it.
Yeah.
And then I said, you know what? I'm going to steal that. I hope it's okay. And I want to try to implement that in my business. And we did. I did right away. So we had, I think within a month of doing that podcast, we had what we do was our mid-year sales on-site meeting, right? So we have a lot of our sales reps, our regional account managers, they are remote. They live in those particular territories that they're servicing, and we fly them in to all be together physically. It's much more powerful. We have a very, very strict agenda over 2 to 3 days, and we do a lot of activities. Some are geared towards social, some are team building, some are just learning, right? And one of the things that we started off on with that particular on-site is we did a hike, and one of the I was talking through the challenges of a hike, because you could tell physically for some people that hike was more challenging than others, right? Yeah. And I was relating that to sales and the objections that you get when you're dealing with your customers and the day-to-day things that happen. Well, I used the Ask Me Anything as an icebreaker, really, just to set the tone. And I started. And then we had, I think, 3 others that you could do Ask Me Anything. And it was, each person, there was enough of us where, you could go on and on for a long time with that. But each person got one question that wanted to ask a question. And it got, let's just say a few didn't hold back and asked some questions.
Playing truth or dare in the workplace. That's great.
Yeah.
How to work out though. So people, I'm talking about what was the impact, right? I get that people might challenge you a little bit. Mm-hmm. They might throw a softball once in a while.
Well, the impact was that it spawned deeper questions after the on-site. Yeah. So I was having one-on-ones. Right. And then they felt more comfortable to ask me more. And so it was, on about 3 different occasions where I had a one-on-one, I had the person say, hey, I really loved the whole Ask Me Anything. And one of the things I really wanted to ask you was this, right? And so and that was a separate meeting weeks,
great.
Several weeks later. And so I think it spawned, one is, I got great feedback from it, and they appreciated it. 2, they appreciated that I was willing to be transparent and vulnerable. Right. And 3, it clearly spawned or increased the comfort level for them to ask deeper questions outside of just that one event.
Yeah. So were they asking business questions, personal questions, combination?
Both.
You got it all.
Yeah, both.
Great. Did you hold back on any answers?
No.
Were there any times you were challenge yourself so that you wouldn't hold back?
No.
You just flat out ask me anything, I'm going to answer it.
Yeah.
All right. Great. So great example of vulnerability right there, and the benefit of vulnerability.
Well, let me go back for a second though. So I like the question that you asked, but I think you said let's talk about vulnerability within the workplace.
In the workplace. And
you're using this as an example. And oh, by the way, we're doing it moving forward in all of our team OGTs.
Great.
So we're those town hall type meetings we have on a monthly basis, and we will continue that. And it's not going to be me. Right. It's going to be a different person every time. And I love that because you got to switch that out. It's not because it's not about me. It's about who else is willing to get vulnerable and who else might others in the company be interested in asking those type of deep questions. Okay, that said, right? So that's what has come from that, and I think we're going to continue to grow a whole other level in our communication as a whole and as a company as a result of that. You said you started this conversation, as you were doing your intro for the topic, and you talked about how you grew up and the environment in which you grew up in, which really impacted you and your ability to be vulnerable. And I don't think we can have a conversation around vulnerability in the workplace without understanding how impacted each one of us are as an individual on the way we grew up and how vulnerability was used within our family and our surroundings. And I'm acknowledging that because I grew up in an Italian American family that we didn't share our feelings, and it was. I grew up. I immediately thought of when you were saying that. The scene in The Godfather. Are you a fan of The Godfather?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So when you were talking, it immediately made me think of the scene. It's toward the beginning of when Johnny Fontaine shows up at the wedding, right? And he comes in to meet with the Godfather, and he's sitting down next to him, and he starts crying, and I just don't think this is I'm going to get my move. You can act like a man.
Yeah.
And he shakes him. I mean, that's what I laugh. My sister and I joke about that quite a bit because it's like that's what I grew up in. It was the moment you started to cry, it was like, and it was this whole
and
messaging.
the whole don't cry. And
it was this messaging of, and if anyone can tell me what it means to be a man, I don't know, because I think it's subjective. That's rhetorical, right? I mean, it's totally subjective. Whoever wants to tell you what that meaning is, but you grew up to this as like, hey, be a man. But my dad never told me what that meant. But one of them for sure that was on the list was, we don't cry.
Don't cry.
And we don't show our feelings.
That's it. That's it. So what's the impact on me? Really where I learned this, the two places that were more so. The school setting was a grad school setting where people sit around and share things. Mm-hmm. That was all right because I'd already gone through a couple things. Mm-hmm. EO was my first entrance into sitting around a table with a bunch, and it was all guys. So talking about, first we tried to talk about business, but then the core of this EO is to talk about how that feels. Mm-hmm. That word feeling, like what? What? We're talking about feelings? Well, yeah, people have them. They're real.
I learned vulnerability in two places. Landmark Worldwide was my first experience with it, and it was a waterfall of emotion that when I was actually vulnerable for probably one of the first times in my life in front of a lot of other people, it was like a waterfall of emotion. It was unreal. And then I would say I didn't truly understand it until Entrepreneurs Organization, EO. And so I'm in complete agreement. Until you were in Forum and understood what we were trying to accomplish within Forum, and it's just gotten easier, and I continue to practice it.
You reminded me of a story that I wasn't thinking about with this, and it happened, I don't know, 30 some odd years ago to me. I was going on a retreat, grew up Catholic, and going on a retreat so that my wife and I, who got married civilly, were going to get married in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. So part of it was a retreat. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time that I'd done a face-to-face confession with a priest.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sitting there, it's been a while since I'd been to church, right? And going through that. And I'm telling this man things that would make a priest's toes curl. I just saying, right? I had a little bit of a life, and I'm thinking, but I did. And the impact of that, like, he just sat there, held my hands, and these loving eyes. It was like so cool. I got up from there because I'd never really been a fan of confession because you had to do so many Hail Marys and all that just to get rid of stuff. Yeah. But that experience for me being vulnerable and the way he received it, the empathy that went with that, I got up from that chair and I felt like I was walking on clouds. It was amazing. So when you were talking about your experience, that it's like, oh crap, yeah, that happened to me too. But EO's when I started doing it with other men, other businessmen, right? Yeah. Because we're supposed to be strong and tough and all that kind of stuff. And it ended up being powerful. What it ended up doing for us, for the forum that I was in, is that ability to share personal private things that you wouldn't be vulnerable for in the past, information with this group of people made us close.
Yeah.
It brought a closeness in. You got to go with the rules. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, kind of stuff. What happens in EO stays in EO. Sure, you have to have the trust to be able to be vulnerable, but the ability to be vulnerable not only draws people towards you, and I don't care if they're employees or
customers or whatever, but it also will build a relationship a lot deeper than you can if you are not.
Yeah.
And business is just relationships. That's all it is. It's people doing things with people.
Yeah.
Right? So why not be a person?
Well, I think especially with those that you work with, that work for you or that you work for.
Yeah.
I think so. We often talk about management and executive management and the challenge of managing up, down, sideways, right? And I think it's the same thing. Is that if you're just willing to get vulnerable in the workplace with the people that you're spending a lot of time with, really it's amazing the relationships that you can build, the trust that you can build.
But it's got to be timed too, right? Because you can do too much too quick with people, and I mean I've seen those folks. Too much too soon, whoa, right?
Yeah.
So there's some of that. So you have to be careful.
There's an appropriateness. So I think what you're talking about
there you go. That's
there's
the right
an
word.
appropriateness to being vulnerable with others. There's no question about it. There's also timing, I think, is where you were going. I think that the delivery of it, you don't walk into the office and, hey guys, guess what? It's time for me to be vulnerable. I think, so a lot of times one-on-one is where it can be most appropriate. So just as an example, when we're having our weekly management meeting on a Monday morning and we're going through where we might be struggling, in one task or another task, and we're asking for help and things like that, that might not be the time, to bring up, there's a dozen people, it's on, it's a virtual call. Okay, just saying, that's probably not.
You don't have to do it all the time, every time. For instance, there's a good example that I can use. If you're having a really rough day and you're just not ready yet, someone's going to come up and say, hey, how you doing? You don't have to blow them off, but you can say, I'm struggling today. I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but I appreciate your concern. That's okay, right? That's okay.
And that is an essence of being vulnerable.
Certainly.
And here, it's a perfect example that you give, because I think oftentimes what we do is we try to, I've said this before, I literally hate the term work-life balance. Like, I just don't like it, because I just think it's well, I'm just going to say it. I think it's bullshit. And here's one of the examples I'm going to give of that. Fact is life happens, right? And you can't it's not a light switch.
Right.
You can't just turn it off and show up and walk through the door and everything just stays behind you. Sorry.
At home or at work. Either way.
It's like you're dragging it with you. Yep. You just are. And you know what? It's okay sometimes if you can't get clear to be present in a meeting or to really be productive. You should just tell somebody, and that is vulnerable. That is being vulnerable.
Yeah.
You don't have
to
risky. Tell them. You don't have
risky.
to tell them what happened. Like, you don't have to give them the details. So vulnerability doesn't mean that you're spilling your guts about everything. That's not what vulnerability is. Sometimes being vulnerable just means, you know what, guys, I'm really struggling mentally right now. It's really hard for me to get present in this meeting. If it's okay with you, I'd love to excuse myself from this meeting. I just need some time to clear, and then can we catch up at a different time, or can we even possibly reschedule? Like that is an example of also being vulnerable, because you're just expressing that you're not in a great place.
I'm not at my best
to be productive enough to have that meeting, and that's okay.
So Brené Brown actually talks about this a little bit, and I think she says something to the effect of, vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Right? So have some boundaries. I mean, you don't have to give up everything about yourself, but the more that you can, when it's in a safe environment, we talked about psychological safety, right, in the previous podcast, but when in a safe environment, when you know that the people are ready to receive it, the more that you give up of yourself when they're ready, the closer you're going to be with those people.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It doesn't mean spill it all out right now and scare the crap out of people with how weak you are or whatever they might want to think.
but you got to make sure the audience is going to be a little receptive too. So you can dish it out in small doses and kind
Absolutely.
of train people how to
Absolutely.
receive
Absolutely.
as well. So
Well, and frankly, what you'll find out is as you're willing to get vulnerable, you'll find out that others will become willing to be vulnerable with you as well. Now, you mentioned Brene Brown because I want to say something, because one of my biggest takeaways from Brene Brown that I absolutely love is she talks about energy that each of us has as like a battery. Think of it as a battery, right? And you think of it on a scale of 1 to 10, or say 1% to 100%, right? Your scale of battery or your energy.
Yeah.
And she said she uses the example of her and her husband, and my wife and I have adopted this, and I've talked about it before.
this.
And it's sometimes you come home, and if your battery's 100%, you come home and there's only 10% left. Well, my wife might be on me about something, and I'll simply just say to her, and I learned this from Brene Brown, I might just say to her, I said, you know what, my battery's at like 10%. And I don't want to have this conversation right now because I just don't have the energy to put into it to make it the productive conversation that it should be and that it deserves. Can we wait till tomorrow to have this conversation? And I think
negotiate it up front though, so you don't just do it to somebody at the last minute, right?
No.
This is something you talked about.
My wife and I know about this.
We have a plan.
We had a conversation about battery and about energy and about all of that, and we made an agreement ahead of time that if one of us calls a timeout, we can say, hey, my battery's low. I don't have the energy for this right now. Can we sleep on it and talk about it? I promise I'll be ready tomorrow morning when I'm 100%. And we have that agreement.
Do you do it at work too? You and your partner?
So I don't, and I probably should. And the reason I'm bringing it up is I realized, wow, that is a tool that absolutely transfers to work, and I haven't done a good job to use that. So that is something that you could bring up. And now that we're talking about it, I am going to bring it up with my team, and especially my leadership team, so that we can look at each other and say, hey, I'm at about 10% right now, because that's common, right? You're at 3-4 o'clock. We're still having meetings, and you might not have the gas to really go after. And it's not fair, because honestly, I can think back in many situations where I'm snapping at people. I'm really short-tempered with them. I'm not productive with my feedback. Hey, and that's happening at 3 or 4 o'clock, and I realize. I even think of an exact example.
Just take a Snickers bar. That's what Betty White did.
Oh my God, it's not going to work for me. Well, you know what? I'll give you a very, very specific example with somebody that works with me, and I started recognizing that this person's work at around 4 o'clock was sloppy, and in fact, a lot of errors were happening, and so, it wasn't him. He's really good at what he does. He's a high performer. Yep. And so it's out of the norm, but I recognized a pattern of when it was happening. And so we had a conversation, and I said, hey, this is what I want to do moving forward is let's not enter orders at, after a certain time each day. Let's focus on other things after a certain time each day, because I think the energy just isn't the same. Let's not try to multitask. I noticed if we're trying to take phone calls from customers and doing things at the same time, not going to work. So yeah, absolutely changed. Yeah. Haven't seen anything since where again we have to just recognize that our batteries, that energy and be.
So the reason I ask you that question, because it really fits in my coaching philosophy, is that if that is a tool that works at home, why wouldn't we use that same tool at work, or
Absolutely.
the other way around?
Yeah.
Because guess what? There's people at home. There's people at work. The common denominator. These are just people. Right? And if it's going to work with people, it's going to work with people. So taking some of the things that we learn to use in the business world and applying those at home, or some of the things we use in our personal lives and applying those in business are going to work.
Yeah.
You may have to condition people because they're not used to that from you in that context, but you can start slowly and get people conditioned to accepting the new Vince or the new Scott or the new whoever. This is who I want to be and how I'm going to show up, and it takes vulnerability to do that as well. To be, I had a client one time that said, and she said this. She goes, "Well, I'm different at home than I am at work." Why?
Yeah.
I said, which one of you do you like better? Well, I like the one at home better. Well, then do that in the workplace too. Now, we have to tread slowly to get people used to that new person, but I guarantee you, it will. If that's your best you and you show up with your best you, it's going to work no matter where you go.
I did that a long time ago. I mean, I was that person. I was a very different person professionally than I was personally, and it was exhausting, frankly.
Yeah.
And once I stopped doing that, it's, oh my God, just what a weight lifted off your shoulders just to be one person all the time. It's nice.
Yeah, and it's generally your best self that you're bringing towards that. Now, we always have our other self that comes up because of stresses and things like that too. I'm not talking about that because we all make mistakes, right? We all do things we wish we wouldn't have done. But the fact is, be your best self wherever you are. So back to the vulnerability thing again. So I'm gonna challenge the audience a little bit to tread lightly, but tread into the vulnerable states. In your company, the Ask Me Anything seemed to be a hit. Right?
Yeah.
And we
So
what? Stole that from somebody else.
Yeah.
That worked.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Right? I don't have any patent on any of my things. Go ahead and use it. Wherever you learn, go learn and use those things. But I think if you start practicing some vulnerability, you will start attracting more people. It's a pretty simple concept.
Well said.
It's the most attractive quality I can have. Better than a fast car or a really cool watch or a really nice suit. Being vulnerable will attract more people to me than anything else that I can think of.
Well, I think the takeaway that I got from you today, and I think it was perfectly said, is what's working at home is going to work at your place of business.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is. It's going to function in the same way. People are people, as you just stated, and I think we forget that. I think we go to our place of work, our place of business, and we forget that these people are just regular people.
Regular people.
And we're all dealing with the same type of stuff, and life just happens.
Well, we're going to get deeper on that when we get our area on empathy, when we start talking about empathy.
Yeah,
but
no question.
I think these things tie together. Vulnerability, empathy, humility. I think they blend.
Well, I think a great place to start too. I mean, if you haven't watched Brene Brown's TED Talk, I think that's it's an 18-minute TED Talk
called The Power of Vulnerability.
It's a great place to start. And I think again, I'm not totally finished with the book yet. I'm about halfway through, but Daring Greatly by Brene Brown is a good place to start. To learn and understand vulnerability at a different level. I didn't know it, as I shared, I didn't know it until I discovered it with Landmark and then, ultimately with EO. And I think as you understand the wide variation around vulnerability, and one of the best ways to do that is just listen to people like Brene Brown or read a book and just gain a whole other perspective
and
around
practice.
it.
Just practice. Just
and
try.
Practice it.
Yeah, try. Practice, see the results.
Yeah.
I know very few people that if I walked up to them and said, I'm really having a hard time, they'd say, so? People don't do that, right?
No, yeah.
They don't. People want to care about other people. So give them an opportunity.
No, and often what you get, the response more often than not is, you know what, I am too.
Yeah.
And they want to talk about it. So, I think open your ears, open your heart, open your eyes to that type of stuff, and you'd be surprised the more vulnerable you're willing to be, you'll see what you get in return for that.
Great. All right, so let's wrap up. Episode 1 for season 3.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. People don't get past 7 podcasts. We've gotten past 7, so we're doing okay. It's been fun.
Right.
We get to have fun topics like
Man,
this a lot.
I'm excited for the season, Scott, because I think we got a lot of killer topics lined up. You talked about humility and empathy. We are going to have podcasts on both of those topics and a handful of others as well. So
let's talk. So not just to think that we're all soft and fluffy kind of people. We're going to be talking about some really serious things too. Toxic work cultures.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about embezzlement.
Yeah.
Right. And ways to protect yourself from that as well. So we're going to have some hard topics coming through the season. So stay tuned. Want you to watch if you like YouTube. Listen to us on Spotify or Apple or any of those podcasts. Always reach out to us, scottandvince@gmail.com. Give us thoughts, ideas, what you liked, what you didn't like, challenges. These 3, vulnerability, empathy, and humility. There's going to be some challenges. Bring it on. We want to hear.
We want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. We want your feedback as always. And until next time.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for the CEO Podcast. Please visit us at theceopodcast.net, where you can learn more about our co-hosts and listen to past episodes. If you would like to have a discussion and dive deeper into any topic, there is also an option to contact Scott or Vince to schedule some time with them. Thanks for listening.